Hello, I've got with me in the studio Father Andrew Coy from Northampton Diocese. Father Andrew, welcome to Walsingham, welcome to the EWTN studios here.
Thank you.
You're a relatively young man. I would say you're still in your 20s.
27.
27.
Yeah.
So in these days, why would a young man decide to become a Catholic priest?
I would say first of all that I felt that God was calling me to the priesthood, and that was certainly a long and interesting process. And I was fortunate enough to be brought up into a Catholic family, very loving family. We all went to church every Sunday together, and really there my faith was nurtured very much in that family setting. But within that, I really from the age of about 10 or 11, I think, I felt that perhaps God was calling me to devote my life to Him in a more particular way. It was always really at Mass that I felt the calling most strongly. I think I was always captivated by what was going on at the altar, and I always felt within me a kind of desire to be part of it. I wasn't entirely sure why or how, but I often would leave Mass with that sense of awe and wonder, really, at what was going on there.
Were you an altar server?
No. I unusually for a seminarian and a priest, I never served at the altar until I entered the seminary. I'm an organist, so I spent a few years at the organ loft, very far removed from the action, as it were, and I'd sort of watch Mass from up there. So in that sense, I was never actively involved in that sense, but I remember, especially as a boy, going to Mass, and I suppose that's where I felt the calling most strongly.
Of course, it's not unusual for Catholic boys at that age to, when they take to Mass, to see a priest and to start to think about priesthood. But it tends to evaporate a lot for most men in their adolescent period. Did the call solidify or clarify during those years?
It was something that I was very embarrassed by.
Which is normally a good sign, right?
Maybe. I think it shows that I was probably taking it seriously.
But also it wasn't something that you were just kind of making up. It
No.
was something...
I think probably it frightened me because I knew it was real, or I suspected it might be real. Yeah. So I didn't really speak to anyone about it until the decision came as to whether I'd go to university or not. And so I approached my parish priest, who also happened to be the vocations director. And I remember I was very, very nervous, but I shared this with him. And I think I was expecting him to be, I don't know, I was worried that he would be shocked or, he'd find it amusing or whatever, but he was very encouraging, and he said he wasn't at all surprised. And he encouraged me to go to university. And it was really at university that I suppose I had that freedom and the independence to follow my own path, really, and I was blessed really to have a very good Catholic community there, and my faith certainly grew at university, and I think my sense of vocation matured in that setting.
And then, how does it work after that? You mean you graduate, and then did you decide?
The first 2 years at university, I just sort of threw myself into university life.
Sure.
And I very much enjoyed it. And the question of vocation was always at the back of my mind, but it wasn't at the forefront, if you know what I mean. I just engaged with life there. But then towards the end of my time at university, especially in my final year, I did have to sort of think to myself, okay, well, where am I going from here? And it was really on retreat. I did a Lenten retreat at Ampleforth for a few days, and it was there that I really kind of decided, I need to give this a go. And it's not as though I'm committing my life to the priesthood here, but I should at least apply and see how it goes, and just attempt to
What happens in that situation? I mean, were you in contact with your parish priest throughout this period? Did you have a spiritual director, or do you just send a letter to somebody and say, to the local bishop, and say, I'd like to do this, or how does it work?
So before I went to university, as I say, I was in touch with the vocations director. And then when I was at university, I kept it quiet because I thought, if I mention to the chaplain that I'm interested in vocations, then I'm going to be sucked in and expected to be very, very active in the chaplaincy life. And I was still very tentative, and I was wary of committing myself quite publicly to something that I was still a little bit hesitant about. But eventually it got to the stage where I thought I could share this with the chaplain there, the chaplaincy was run by Dominicans. And I approached him, and again I was very nervous, but he said, I was waiting for you to come and share this with me, which was very encouraging, really. And he helped me a lot as well.
Did he?
And he arranged for basically a sort of vocations group. There are quite a few students, a number of whom actually ended up in seminary with me. But a few students in Durham who were thinking about vocations, and we'd get together, once or twice a term, and just have dinner, and it wouldn't be too intense or serious, but it's just a way of, and that really helped me.
So you left university, and did you enter the seminary straight away then? Yes.
So I applied to seminary in my final year at university. And I had an interview with the bishop.
In Northampton?
In Northampton.
Yeah.
And 10 days later I started in Rome, so it was a very, very short space of time.
Was that a bit surprising for you?
It was, yeah. I didn't really have much time to think too much about it, really. It was, we'd like you to start now, please, and then you're thrown into it. So
talk me through this. How does it work? I mean, is it sort of academic term times for the seminary?
Yes. Yes.
September, October, sort of beginning.
We started in early October.
Okay.
And then we'd have a couple of weeks holiday for Christmas, and then we would have exams after Christmas.
Yeah.
And then you'd have a second semester.
Right.
From the spring really until June, and then you'd have exams at the end.
And is it straight into studies, or is there a year of discernment or
it depends.
Formation of some
It depends. A lot of seminarians would have what's known as a propedeutic year, and that's a year that's designed to help prepare you for seminary, and there'll be a particular emphasis on developing your prayer life. And preparing you for the programme of studies. Mm-hmm. So
it's a sort of postulancy for
sort
a year
of,
type thing? Yeah.
And but each seminarian has their own story, and I think a bishop would very much tailor formation according to the individual's needs and background and so on. I didn't do that year myself.
No.
I went straight into seminary.
And how many men were in your year when you were starting out?
In my year, I think there were 9 of us.
9 at the Roman English College in Rome.
Yeah.
9 starting out, and were they all your age, or was there a mixture? Or
there's a bit of a mixture. 2 were from Norway. There was one who's actually younger than I, and then. The rest would be in their sort of mid-20s, but quite a mix in terms of backgrounds. Quite a few of them were from non-Catholic backgrounds or even non-religious backgrounds, and had found faith later on in life.
And of the 9 that started, how many were ordained?
Well, we've all taken different directions, really. So. The 2 Norwegians are both priests now in Norway.
Wow.
I've been ordained a priest, and then the other two, there are two who are deacons at the moment, and then a few do leave the seminary in the process. They realise that God's not calling them to the priesthood, and that's what the seminary is there for. Really, is to discern whether or not this is for you. And so people do leave along the way. There's a certain fluidity,
which is to be expected, I guess.
Yeah.
So, how many years is seminary training?
Again, it depends. I went into seminary thinking I'd do 7 years there, and I ended up doing 4.5. So,
how does that work?
Well, COVID sort of interrupted everything. But normally it would be 6 or 7 years. It can be 8 years if you do the propedeutic year, but anything between 4 and 8 years. Yeah.
And was it your first time living in Italy?
Living in Italy, yes. I mean, my mother's Italian, so I'd been going to Italy.
Sure. And you speak Italian?
Yeah.
Which must have been an advantage.
I try to. Yeah. But certainly it was my first time living in Rome, and that was very exciting, and took some getting used to.
Well, I was thinking it's because entering a seminary in England would be quite a challenge, in the sense that you're now entering into discerning something. Is it real or is it not? And there's all sorts of pressure around that new set of studies, etc., etc. But then to go to Rome, it seems to hype it up a bit more. You're in a wonderful city and a different culture, and you're the centre of the church. I'd find it very distracting. Did you?
It was. I remember it was quite overwhelming, and it took me. I mean, the first year really was. It took a while to settle.
I bet.
And once I had, I fell in love with Rome.
Did
really,
you?
and where else would you want to study to be a priest? I mean, there's so much history and
absolutely. Plus, there's a sense of the universality of the church.
Yes,
presumably some of your seminarians when you were attending lectures and things were from all around the globe.
Yes, yeah, that's one of the things I really enjoyed, was making friends with, and I still have friends all over the world really, who I got to know through the universities. So that was certainly an advantage. Coming to a much fuller understanding of the universality of the church. And, when you reflect on the joys and struggles of your own local church, the church here in England, you're able to look at it through that lens of, well, the church has its joys and its struggles in very different ways in other parts of the world. And, the church is growing. In many parts of the world in a way which for us wouldn't necessarily be
absolutely
our own experience.
Of all your studies, your theological, philosophical studies, which aspect did you enjoy most?
Well, I studied history at university, so I've always been interested in history, but probably the scriptural studies I very much enjoyed. They were very well taught. And to be able to engage with texts which I was familiar with, but then to kind of, scratch the surface and just have a little bit of a deeper understanding of Scripture, and even learning very, very basic Greek, I found that very, very rewarding, and I very much enjoyed that.
Will you be doing further studies?
Possibly.
That's for another day.
As much up to the bishop as me. But
so you were ordained on what day?
The 25th of March.
Oh, wonderful! Because the Annunciation obviously is such a great connection with Walsingham and the Holy House.
Yes. Yeah.
I know you said before we came on air that you had visited Walsingham many times as a young man, as a layman. Is this your first visit as a priest?
It is. Yeah.
Does it feel different?
It does. As you say, I used to come here very often. We used to come every year on the pro-life pilgrimage, and so I have very early memories of being here in Walsingham, and it was always this time of year as well, September. And so I almost feel as though I'm kind of reconnecting with that part of my childhood where I always had a deep love of Walsingham, There's something very beautiful, very peaceful about it, and you really get a sense here of that unbroken line of Marian devotion, which runs very, very deep in this country. And as a priest, this morning I celebrated Mass in the Slipper Chapel, and I had a very keen sense that I was, worshipping in a space, celebrating Mass in a space that for centuries has meant so much to Catholics of this country. And after what's been such a difficult year and a half, to have that, to be able to reconnect with a place that's been so important for me it's been a beautiful experience.
Were you very conscious of England and also your home diocese when you were in Rome? Did you feel a special connection with...
I was, yeah.
Do you have a sense of mission to that particular part of this country?
Yes, I think so. I was very aware of, how privileged I was to be in Rome, and to get to know it as a city.
Yeah.
But I certainly never, the diocese was always very much in my mind, and especially, I suppose, with your studies, I would try and think, well, this isn't just for my own edification, but this is, these studies are here to serve a greater purpose as well, and to try and build up the church back in England as well, through preaching, teaching, whatever.
So, as nice as Northampton is, it can't really compete with Rome and all its its wonders and attractions and interests. But how's that first 6 months been as a priest? I mean, in terms of you've been thinking about it, praying about it, being talked to about it for the last number of years, and you've been preparing for this moment. How does it feel then to be Father Andrew at Northampton Cathedral?
I think I felt very, very keenly in myself that, whatever deficiencies I have, which are many, as a man, God can still work through you. I remember when Pope Benedict, I don't really remember, but if you watch the footage of when Pope Benedict was elected, and he said, it comforts me greatly to know that the Lord can work even with insufficient means. And I think that's been my experience of priesthood, even in the 6 months that I've been a priest. I'm very, and when you're hearing confession, I remember hearing my first confession, and I was very nervous, thinking, what will I say? What will I say? But the Spirit gives you the words. And when I'm going into hospital, sometimes you're walking into very challenging situations, but I'm not walking in there as Andrew Coy. I'm walking in there as a priest, and you're bringing Christ to people. And so I've felt very strongly that the Spirit has been working through me, and in that sense, it's not quite so daunting, really. It doesn't all rely on you and your strengths of character. You just have to be open and docile to the Holy Spirit, and that's something which brings great joy. And great peace as well. So it's been a real lesson to me in how to just rely totally on God's grace.
Obviously, the clue is in the name priest. The priest, central to a priest's life is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And I wonder, when you were a young boy and you were watching the priest and you felt this kind of strange attraction, and now you're a man and you're a priest, how has your appreciation or understanding of that sacrifice grown?
Whenever I celebrate Mass, it's always slightly different, if that makes any sense. I think for me, the Mass has always been something beautiful, fundamentally. It's a beautiful gift which God gives us, and an opportunity for us to give to God. And so, the Mass is this beautiful language of love, of God speaking to us, and we are able to speak to God. And as a priest, I find that my role obviously has changed from being in the congregation. You're very much an active voice in that conversation between the people and God.
Yeah.
And that's been quite a powerful experience, and often very, very moving as well.
Yeah, I mean, do you get a sense of the appreciation of the congregation, of the parishioners, that... I mean, we're very conscious how few priests there are sometimes in certain parts of this country, and we're so grateful that there's a priest there who can, without the priest we don't have Mass, we don't have confession, we don't have the sacraments,
Yeah.
So do you get a sense of that appreciation?
I do. I'm very fortunate in the sense that the parish I'm in is extremely warm and welcoming and appreciative, and they're not shy in expressing their own gratitude, and that can be very affirming, really. I mean, especially as a young priest, you're never entirely sure whether you're doing things right, but people have been very good at yeah.
Can it be a bit sort of strange though as well, because you're a relatively young man? And you're going to meet people who are a lot older than you, who immediately defer and want your advice or your wisdom on something. Is that sometimes a bit daunting when you're confronted with situations that maybe are not strictly pastoral, but people assume the priest, might be able to help or give guidance on something?
Yes, it can be, certainly. And particularly when people confide in you, people who are much older and much wiser. And it can be very daunting. But then I try and remind myself that I'm not there, as Andrew Coy. I'm there as a priest, and you can draw upon, the riches that the Church offers you in her teaching, to try and guide people in the right direction. But I would never see my role as one of sort of, standing here and saying to people, you need to come here. I know it sounds cliche, but the priest is very much one who walks with his people.
Sure.
A lot of things that people are struggling with, it's not as though I'm exempt from that myself. So a lot of what I share with people.
What sort of sense do you get from your fellow priests, both in your deanery and further afield? Northampton's probably one of the smaller dioceses in Great Britain. Is there a strong sense of fraternity amongst your fellow priests?
There is, thank God. Yeah. We're a mixed bunch.
Of course, ages,
we
backgrounds,
come in all different shapes and sizes.
Sure.
But there is a very strong sense of fraternity in the diocese, for which I'm very, very grateful. And we do get together fairly regularly. And I think that's life-giving for all of us, really.
You must be the youngest priest in the diocese.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yeah. You hesitated there, which is a good sign. There may be somebody equally there or thereabouts. But if there's anybody watching this, a young man, maybe a bit like yourself, 10, 12, 13, 14, or a little bit older, slightly embarrassed, thinks they may have a calling, slightly embarrassed, what would you say to that young person, that young man watching this today?
When I was in seminary, we were fortunate enough to have a private audience with the Holy Father. It was back in April 2018, I think. And he shared his thoughts with us. And there's one thing he said that really struck with me. And he said, don't be afraid of yourself. And I think that I would give that advice, really. Don't be afraid of yourself. I think we're all very aware of our limitations, and probably not so aware of our strengths. And so often, we can allow ourselves to be, intimidated, frightened, almost overwhelmed by our own sense of unworthiness. Especially, if you're thinking of something like the priesthood. But it's a way of life which requires a kind of an openness to God.
Yeah.
And fear plays no part in that. So I suppose I would very much encourage that person to be be courageous in the right, in the right sense. That you might not feel as though you can achieve much, but through you, God can achieve great things. And I would very much encourage someone just to try it and see where it goes.
And would you say you're happy in your priesthood?
Oh, very, yeah.
It comes across.
Yeah.
But it's important, right? Every vocation has its joys and its sorrows.
There are times when it's tiring and stressful,
of course.
But I know that I wouldn't be happy doing anything else.
Absolutely.
And deep down, I know that the Lord is calling me to this, and that's where our fulfillment and our happiness lies. Is conforming our will to His.
Wonderful. Well, we're so grateful that you've dropped in to see us today,
you.
Father Andrew. It's so nice to have such a young priest amongst us. It gives us hope for the future and hope for the future church. And we hope you will return and maybe keep us updated on your progress as a priest over the next few years. That would be great fun.
Lovely. Yeah.
And we wish you Godspeed back to Northampton.
Thank you. Thank you very much.